So I always get told, whether it's through comments on Instagram or YouTube, or honestly, there's a lot of people in my quote unquote real life who have said this to me, that I am the most disciplined and structured person that they know. And how do I do it? How do I stay organized with work? How do I maintain a social life and have time for hobbies and also stay sane all at the same time? How did I stop being lazy and become so productive? And honestly, I want to clear things up a little bit right on the get go. First, I am not productive all the time. Obviously, nobody is. But what I am is disciplined all the time. And there's a big difference between productivity and discipline. You probably aren't lazy. I always get a little bit not mad, but we'll say sad when people call themselves lazy, because a lot of times laziness isn't necessarily your fault, and you probably aren't lazy. Like, I wasn't lazy either. What you are, if you feel lazy, is burnt out and overstimulated. Maybe you are understructured, you are emotionally dysregulated, and you're trying to rely on motivation to carry through on habits that actually require systems. Okay. And we talked about this in the episode last week. So you can go back and listen to that too. I think that's a good precursor for this episode. But generally speaking, when people call themselves lazy, what they usually mean is like, I can't follow through on the promises that I keep to myself. Even when I care about something, I procrastinate. I know what to do, but then I just don't actually do it and execute on it. And I waste time, and then I feel guilty about it afterwards, which I can relate to all of those things. But what is so important to distinguish here is that that's not laziness. It's a lack of discipline skills. And discipline, in my opinion, has a little bit of a branding problem. We have been taught that discipline means forcing yourself to do things that you don't want to do, or white knuckling your way through life, or becoming like a very rigid and joyless version of yourself. And this framing really turns people off to becoming disciplined before they even try, because they think that, oh, if I become disciplined and structured, then everything in my life becomes rigid and so black and white. But the reframe that changed everything for me when it came to discipline is that discipline is a form of self-respect in action. It's how you show yourself that your goals and your time and your future matter more than your momentary discomfort. So this episode is going to be all about how to move from being what I'm calling lazy adjacent to being focused, consistent, and effective in a way that's both sustainable and realistic. It's not extreme. It's not necessarily like the aesthetic productivity that we see online that I honestly feel like is a little bit empty. It's just skills, practices, and habits that are going to give you real results, especially if you really want 2026 to be the year that you actually quote unquote lock in. Before we get into the rest of the episode, a quick reminder that I do have a new Substack. It's called Beyond Your Budget. And on Thursdays, so my podcast episodes come out on Wednesdays. On Thursdays, I release what is essentially the written companion to this week's episode. So in those Substack essays, oh my goodness, I go through in more detail what we talk about on the podcast. I'll link out different resources or, show pictures and things. So if you are enjoying the show and you want a little bit more, I recommend subscribing to my Substack. It is currently free. I mean, these articles will always be free, and it's always linked in the description. So I would love to see you there, because this year, when I'm thinking about my own discipline and lock-in for 2026, I'm very, very, very focused on long-form content. I'm having a lot of fun here with the long form of it all, just because I really think that the future of content is long form, and it's much more fun for me to connect with you in this way. Like, I absolutely love reading your comments and hearing from you, and hearing that the things that I'm sharing and the things that I'm experiencing in my own life resonate with you too. It makes me feel much less alone, and hopefully it makes you feel the same. So with that in mind, let's get into the rest of today's episode. So before you can actually become disciplined, you have to stop mislabeling the problem, especially mislabeling it as laziness, which has a very negative connotation. The issue with laziness explicitly is that it implies a character flaw. Discipline problems are generally or almost always structural, and they're usually related to life admin overwhelm, which again, we discussed last week. So I recommend you go back and listen to that episode. But there are a few common reasons why most people feel lazy. First being they have too many decisions that they need to make. And if everything in your life requires a decision, your brain naturally is just going to opt out. This is analysis paralysis. It's why, you can get really overwhelmed if you have a lot of emails or you have to figure out what to eat for dinner. And like these very simple tasks just feel totally impossible. You probably have decision fatigue and you don't even realize how many times throughout the day you're making decisions that you may not even really need to be making if you did a little bit of like structural admin on the front end of every week. The next reason is that you have no clear standards. So if you don't have rules for yourself, you negotiate everything. I talk about this a lot when it comes to consumption rules and improving your spending, because if you are someone who doesn't have like guidelines or rules around how you spend, everything you buy is going to be a negotiation with yourself, and ultimately you'll justify your way into buying something. Negotiation is exhausting and you will justify your way out of anything. So this applies to shopping, but it applies to pretty much everything in your life. The next common reason people feel lazy is through emotional avoidance. So procrastination is really what this is, and more often than not, it's related to avoiding discomfort. Like, have you ever had an experience where you would probably do literally anything besides go in and answer your emails, and then you finally sit down and answer your emails and you realize that, okay, that wasn't that hard? That's emotional avoidance. Like, that answering your emails is something you don't particularly enjoy doing, so you'll do anything to avoid actually doing it when doing the emails is the only thing that's going to make you feel better. The next reason is dopamine dysregulation. So that's constant stimulation, and constant stimulation ultimately trains your brain to resist effort. And this is obviously a huge rampant problem in today's society because of our phones, from scrolling to background noise to never giving ourselves the space to just let our brains sit. I also have a podcast episode about this, about going a little bit more analog. So I recommend you listen to that too. And then lastly, goals that are more abstract instead of operational. So like, let's say you go into 2026 and your New Year's resolution, which I've mentioned before, I don't really love resolutions, was to get healthier. Getting healthier is not necessarily like an actionable thing. Walking for 30 minutes every morning would be a more actionable goal. So if you're super abstract with what you want to achieve, like I want to save money, it's probably not going to happen because you have no operation or system to actually do that. Although if you're following my break your budget stuff, then you do have a system, because I talk about that all the time. But once you understand this, discipline stops feeling like a personality trait. Like, you being lazy is not an identity. And it starts feeling like a system that you can actually build. And that's because it literally is. So now I want to define discipline correctly, because I think that we really do need to reframe discipline as a form of self-respect, and that does change how you look at it. Discipline is literally doing what you said you would do, even when it's inconvenient, because you respect yourself enough to keep your word and you know that it will make your life better or easier or whatever it is that's important to you. That's it. It's not a punishment. It's not a grind culture, and it's not becoming someone else. Self-respect shows up as keeping promises to yourself. You said you're going to do something, so you need to go do it. An example of this in my own life is I want to stop scrolling and I want to create silent blocks in my day. So to do that, I got a break, because I know myself well enough that motivation isn't going to be enough to keep me from scrolling. Maybe it'll work for the first couple of days, but eventually I'm going to give in. So with the brick, I made a conscious decision to say, I'm going to block myself from these apps and I'm going to quite literally train myself and develop the skill to put my phone down and to refocus my attention. That's how I keep the promise to myself, because what it does is it creates conditions where I will ultimately succeed, which is really my next point. Creating conditions where you succeed means that you're creating routines, you're focusing on life admin and maintenance, and you're creating an environment where you can thrive. Another thing that I get asked about a lot is like how I keep my space so clean and organized. It's because I can't exist in a space that isn't this way. So I have the discipline to make sure I make my bed, I clean up after myself, I keep my desk organized, I, organize my blankets and whatnot on my couch, I fluff my pillows, because that creates an environment that I spend a lot of time in where I can succeed with building and growing my business. I could not work from home if my space was a disaster. And lastly here, self-respect shows up as not constantly betraying your own intention. So every time that you say, I'll do it tomorrow, which is something I do more often than I'd like to admit, and then ultimately you don't actually do it tomorrow, you're teaching yourself that your word doesn't actually matter. This erodes your confidence and it makes it even harder to show up after yourself, because it's kind of like, what's the point? So every time you follow through, even if it's totally imperfect, you build trust with yourself. It's a daily practice and something that requires constant work. It can't be fixed in, one overnight. Disciplined people are not necessarily people who are exceptionally, fantastic or more motivated or anything, but they do have a lot of self-respect, whether that self-respect is innate, which for some people it is, or developed, which I think for most of us, it takes time, being an adult to kind of learn enough about yourself and develop that sense of self-respect. And they know that when they show up for themselves through habits, routines, boundaries, whatever, their lives will get infinitely better. A great example of this is actually a creator. Her name is Becca Hemsworth, and she often makes videos about her 5 a.m. morning routine where she talks about how she gets up so early, because her most common question is like, how do you stay motivated to do this? And her response is always the same, like, no matter what, no matter how good my night routine is the night before, no matter how early I go to bed, it's always hard to get up, but I always feel infinitely better when I do. That is literally self-respect in action. It's choosing to show up for herself every single day, even though it feels hard in that moment or it feels uncomfortable when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m. and you have to get up to go to a workout. She knows that when she goes through this routine, she's going to feel better afterwards and she's going to have a better day because of it. That is literally the definition of discipline as self-respect. This is why motivation isn't usually enough to become discipline. Motivation is what gives you the momentum to get started, but it's never going to carry you through on the days that feel really hard or really tough. Motivation is, in my opinion, unreliable. Systems are not. I mentioned this last week. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. It's from the book Atomic Habits, which you should absolutely read or listen to on audio if you haven't yet. If you are waiting to feel motivated, you are outsourcing your progress to your mood of the day. And your mood is going to change all the time. Like literally, I feel like I'm in a different mood every single day. If you watch my Instagram stories, you probably figured that out. Disciplined people do not ask, do I feel like it? They ask, what is the plan? And this is why structure matters so much. It's why I feel like I always default to to-do lists and checklists and structure, and why I try to create so much structure in my day, even though technically I don't need to. Because without that structure, you're kind of just floating in the abyss, and it becomes really hard to stay on track towards your goals, especially when your motivation ebbs and flows, which is totally normal. Like I think having a few days of being motivated and then feeling a little bit tired or burnt out is a normal experience. But when you associate motivation as like a personality trait and losing that motivation as being lazy, it just completely warps your self-identity. And I feel like it just makes everything so much harder. So if you want to become more disciplined, your first job is not to try harder, it's to start designing your life so discipline is easier. So, structure, what it does is it removes friction, it reduces decision making, and it protects your energy. So, let's talk about how you can actually start doing this. This is the more practical part of the episode because, as I've said, most people aren't really lazy, but I do think they're lazy adjacent, which is different. To me, this is having pure intentions to become more disciplined, but you struggle with the actual implementation of making these changes over a long period of time. So I have a few tips here on how you can actually fix that. The first tip is to lower what's called activation energy. So if something feels really hard to start, you're going to avoid it. That's normal. So you need to make starting easier. So an example of this would be, let's say you want to do morning workouts going forward. Laying things out the night before would be an example of reducing activation energy. And so I used to do this actually when I was working my 9 to 5 many years ago, pre-COVID. I lived in Boston. This was when we were in the office 5 days a week. I would go on a run every single morning at 6 a.m. And then I would have about 45 minutes to shower and get ready for the day. And I lived in an apartment with 3 other girls. We had 1 bathroom. So like our bathroom time was scheduled. So I had to be rigid with my schedule and execute things on time. So what I did was every night before I went to bed, I laid everything out. I laid out my workout clothes on my bureau. I picked out my work outfit so that I knew exactly what I was going to have to wear and I didn't have to waste time in my precious getting ready time that was already pretty slim, throwing clothes around and figuring out what to wear. I would prep and pack my lunch, put it all together and stick it in the fridge. So when I was done getting ready and heading out the door, I could just grab it and leave. I didn't have to think about anything. And then I would prep my coffee. So when I got out of the shower, I could hit go. My coffee would brew. I used a percolator at the time. And within 5 minutes, my coffee was ready. I wasn't wasting any time. It was all taken care of the night before. And as a result, the next morning was seamless. It was like a dance. I didn't have to think about anything besides going through the steps of my routine. So if having a more structured routine or integrating working out into your morning is a goal, you have to start the night before by not even just going to bed earlier, but removing the friction of the steps in order to actually make getting to that workout and still getting where you need to go for the day done and on time. Another tip here would be to break your tasks that you need to do down into embarrassingly small steps. So an example of this that I, practice and implement a lot is just brain dumping, which is pretty simple. I do this on Sundays when I'm mapping out my week or anytime I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'll literally pull out my notebook. I have it right here actually. And I will just write down all of the jumbled up tasks in my head that have been hanging over me that are clouding my ability to start getting things done or take action. I list out everything I'm going to do and everything that I need to do in order to actually check things off. So let's say, okay, I need to record 2 YouTube videos. So what needs to actually happen for me to do those things? I need to script the video. I need to take a shower. I need to put some makeup on. I need to brush my hair. I need to pull out and charge my mic. I need to make sure that I'm doing it during the time of day where there's good enough lighting. There's so many little minute decisions that go into one broader decision, and it feels really hard sometimes to get the ball rolling. So listing out those individual teeny little tasks makes such a difference when it comes to organizing your brain and actually kicking things off. Sometimes when you're overwhelmed, the act of getting everything out is all it takes to take the first step. You don't need more willpower to do this. You just need to reduce, again, the decision fatigue, which I think is just the broader theme of a lot of my episodes lately. Next here, when we're thinking about how to stop being lazy adjacent, is to start setting non-negotiable minimums for your day. So discipline is something that really thrives on setting standards. This means that on the daily, you need to have a few minimum non-negotiables that you must do. For me, this is an hour of deep work where I'm completely unplugged from my phone. I like to do this in the mornings, but depending on my schedule, sometimes it happens a little bit later in the day. Also, sometimes in the mornings, I'm feeling a little bit like jumbled up or tired or whatever. So I'll save my like completely uninterrupted time for a little bit later when I'm a little bit more in the groove. But I do at least 1 hour of deep work every day. Next, my next minimum is 10,000 steps. Without fail, I will always 110% get my 10,000 steps in. And then my skincare routine and making my bed. Those are the baselines of my entire day. And I always try to obviously aim higher, but I minimally stick to this because I know that I'll feel my best when I do these 4 things. If I hit these things, my day is a success no matter what. So I want you to think about what your minimum things are every day. I'd actually love to hear them. If you want to share them, leave a comment, because when you're aiming to have a perfect day every day, like you're not setting yourself up for success. So it could be a simple routine, like maybe your daily minimum is just executing on your morning routine. Or it could be a menu of things throughout the day, similar to me. Like mine kind of span the full day. They're not just concentrated on my morning. It totally, though, can be different depending on who you are, how you live your life, what's important to you, what your goals are, etc. But really, at the end of the day, consistency beats intensity. So being consistent with just a minimum for 2 weeks is enough to really start getting the ball rolling and show yourself that you can be disciplined. And then you just build on that over time. Next, when it comes to becoming lazy adjacent or no longer being lazy adjacent, you need to start thinking about creating rules, not moods. So rules eliminate the mental negotiation, and your brain will always default to comfort, which is generally not a disciplined state. And again, that's normal. That's why I always say, if you are someone who is trying to reach financial goals and you're not tracking your expenses, you are spending more money than you think. And it's because your brain defaults to comfort. So you will subconsciously, whether you're aware of it or not, ignore money that you're actually spending because you don't want to admit to yourself what you're buying, what you're spending on. Like, it's a very normal, habitual human thing to do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a character flaw, but it is something you have to acknowledge if you want to change the behavior. So rules really help with setting like a minimum standard that you stick to. Examples would be, I work out before I check my phone. This is one for me. Like, I get up, I don't work out before I check my phone, but I get up and I go through a little morning routine before I check my phone. And I stick to this because my phone is bricked. That's like, the activation energy of it all. And I've removed the friction and the motivation. Another example would be I plan my week every Sunday. This is another thing that I do. I have a vlog about this on my YouTube channel. Next is I don't decide what to eat when I'm already hungry. Another thing I don't do because I plan out my meals at the top of the week. A few of my other personal rules are I don't check my phone first thing in the morning. I walk 10,000 steps every day, no matter what. And I don't go to bed until my kitchen is clean. Rules help conserve your energy. They turn discipline into your default behavior, and default behaviors ultimately just become part of your lifestyle. So think about it. Like, you probably wake up every morning and you brush your teeth and you're not even thinking about it. You want your habits and rituals to be at the same caliber of brushing your teeth. Like, you're not going to skip a day of brushing your teeth. Why? Because that's gross. Like, why would you do that? Same as like, you're not going to skip a day of getting your steps in. You're not going to skip a day of making your bed and picking up your kitchen. Like, those are minimums that you have to set, again, based off of your own life and preferences. And they just become your default. I can't remember the last time I didn't make my bed. Like, I make my bed my day doesn't start until my bed is made. Moving on, and this is the last thing to do to stop being lazy adjacent, is to respect your nervous system. If you are someone who is constantly overstimulated, discipline is going to feel absolutely impossible because focus requires regulation, and regulation comes from having moments of silence where you can like fully center yourself. So if you're anything like me, you have probably spent many days and potentially weeks of your life over the last couple of years glued to your phone or constantly stimulated with podcasts or music in the background of everything. And this makes it infinitely harder to focus and get anything done. So how do you reduce overstimulation? First is by less multitasking. So I mitigate this with a clear to-do list. That's like my number one. And I also have themed days for work. Again, I talked about this last week in the life admin episode. I also aim to focus on just one thing at a time. So like if I'm doing my skincare, I'm doing my skincare. I'm not scrolling, I'm not listening to anything. I'm just going through the steps and getting it done. I don't need background noise. If I'm scripting a podcast or a YouTube video, I don't need a video playing in the background. I don't need to be on my phone simultaneously. Like all of this background noise slows you down and it makes it feel like you can't focus on anything. So like when I'm trying to get in the zone for work, my phone is bricked and it's out of sight. It's in a drawer. It's in my bedroom. It's just not anywhere near me where I'm even tempted to pick it up because I know the second that I pick it up, I'm now going to get into multitasking mode and that is not, it's just not efficient and it's not a good use of my time or my brain energy. Next here would be having less dopamine hits throughout the day. So this means less scrolling in general, which I think we can all collectively agree is kind of a goal. But specifically when bookending your days, I think this is really important. So I don't touch my phone anymore until usually 10 a.m. and around 8 o'clock every night, I'm also bricking it so that it's completely out of my ether. And I'm just like focused on whatever it is I'm doing at that time. And then lastly here, we have more silence and space. I don't fear boredom anymore. I feel like I went through periods of time where it was like, oh, if I don't have any plans or anything to do, like that's a bad thing. Now I kind of embrace being bored. I actually enjoy it. Maybe that's just a factor of getting older, but I'm totally fine to just let my brain sit, even throughout the day. Like if I hit a lull in my day or I'm feeling like I'm not able to focus, I'm probably overstimulated and I need to default back to being a little bit bored. So I'll literally just sit there. Like I'll put my phone away, I'll turn my computer down, I'll sit in silence, I'll close my eyes, I'll do some box breathing, which is what my therapist has taught me to do, and I will literally try to just reactivate by allowing the volume and the temperature in my head to come down. This is a very difficult thing to do. I still struggle with it, but I'm actively and consciously making the decision to work on it because it does get easier over time, I can confirm. And it's something that helps you incorporate and build more discipline into your day. Because again, if you're overstimulated, everything feels so much harder. One of the biggest myths about discipline, I think, is that some people are just naturally focused, which for most of us is not true. At least maybe we were born with an attention span and life degrades that just through how we exist as people in current day. Focus, though, is really something, it's not something that you either have or don't have. It's not something that like, oh, I have it and you don't. It's a skill that in the same way it's degraded by how we live, it's also shaped by how we live, how we structure our time, and what you allow to access your attention. I think another layer of how to think about discipline beyond just self-respect is like, what access are you giving other external things to you? And that sort of changes the way you look at it. If you feel like you can't concentrate or you can't sit still or you can't stay on task, it doesn't mean that you are broken or, again, lazy in any way. It usually means your attention has been fragmented for a long time because, again, our phones are quite literally ruining our attention span and our ability to pay attention because we live in an environment that rewards distraction. It's so funny because I feel like, and if you are, I'll say like over the age of 29, so, you existed in the working world or maybe 28. You existed in the working world where you were in the office 5 days a week before COVID. I feel like we can all collectively agree that like it didn't used to be this way. I genuinely believe that COVID and the assimilation of TikTok into our culture has made it absolutely impossible to pay attention. Like I used to go to work and be able to focus all day long. And I was never on TikTok until the middle of COVID. Like it was not something that I struggled with. And now it's almost like I'm completely unable to focus for long periods of time. And I really don't like that. Because when you think about it, like we're constantly inundated with notifications. Like now I'm someone, my phone is on do not disturb 24/7. I don't allow any notifications to pop up on my phone ever. Like ever, ever, ever. Because I'm not allowing something to draw my attention. I need to choose to go into my phone. Background noise, this is another thing I'm eliminating from my life. Constant input. Over time, what happens is our brains adapt to that super high pace and expectation of dopamine. It starts expecting novelty every couple of seconds. And so when you sit down to do something that requires sustained effort, it feels really difficult and really uncomfortable immediately. And that discomfort is not a sign that you should stop. It's a sign that your brain is out of practice. And I say this because I really want to emphasize that it is something you can train and retrain just like a muscle. Focus comes from containment and from giving your time edges. It's why I also like to really time block a lot of my tasks or my work blocks in general. Like, for example, last year in April, I went on a business retreat with a couple of my friends down in Austin, Texas. And we had, I want to say, 2 or 3 2-hour focus work blocks where we all co-worked together, but we were working on different things, but it was like a 2-hour sprint. The amount of time I felt like I had in my day because I was able to contain my work blocks, it completely reshaped. Now I literally structure my day by work blocks. It totally reshaped the way that I view getting things done, because you will expand in the same way you expand to the space that you have. It's why I like a small space. Your tasks will expand to the time you give them. So if you give yourself 10 minutes, you'll get it done. If you give yourself 2 hours, it'll take you 2 hours to do it. Like having those edges is essential. When everything is open-ended, your mind has too much space to wander and there's too much room to get distracted. When your work has a clear beginning and a clear end or a clear timeline, your brain can settle into a better flow and you ultimately get significantly more done. I think this too is why disciplined people don't try to focus all day long, and it's because it's really not possible. They work in defined blocks. This is why I now work in defined blocks. They decide in advance when they're working and when they're not. And in those on periods, they're on. And in the off periods, they're off. I know with a traditional 9-to-5 day job, that can be challenging. But even if you can fragment your days or cluster your meetings or something, or, dedicate 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening for focus work, it can completely change the way and the time it takes to get things done. Another important layer of improving your focus here too is removing obvious distractions instead of trying to test your willpower. So if your phone is next to you, you're not weak for wanting to check it. Discipline is not about constantly resisting temptation. It's about designing your environment so temptation has less access to you. So that's why I put my phone in a drawer, or I put my phone in a different room, or I brick my phone. Like I want to even remove the temptation and the habit of grabbing it, because half the time you grab and reach for your phone, you don't even want it. It's just literally a habitual thing that we've now trained ourselves to do. If you want to rebuild your focus, you have to start smaller than you think you need to. So that could be like 10 or 20 minutes of real uninterrupted work, or 5 minutes of silence. I bet you, if I challenged you to just set a timer on your phone and sit down in silence without touching your phone, without listening to anything for 5 minutes, it would likely feel like a literal eternity. So you need to start small, because ultimately focus compounds, and even a few minutes of uninterrupted work or uninterrupted silence is a lot more powerful than hours of scattered effort. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes not only to do it, but also to return to it. Like you will crave those focused blocks in the same way that you train yourself to crave scrolling on your phone. The last layer of this that I want to really touch on is productivity that will actually move your life forward, because I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. And it's because productivity is often confused with just activity. Being busy, constantly having a full calendar, checking boxes off does not necessarily equate to being productive. And I don't understand why we glorify being busy. I personally hate being busy. My life goal is to have more time, free time. I don't want to be busy. I want to have the least amount of commitments on my calendar so I can enrich my life in the ways that I personally choose and want to. Being productive is not synonymous with doing more. It means you're doing the right things consistently. So if you look at some of the most productive people in the world, at least, for example, to me, one of them is Justin Welsh. He has optimized his business in his day in a way where he earns, but he's not scaling to a point of being burnt out, 110% booked. He's found his sweet spot in his work-life balance, or what he calls life-work balance, what he needs to do, and then he otherwise enjoys his life. And to me, that's the ultimate goal when I think about discipline and productivity. I don't want to have an over-optimized life. I don't want to be booked and busy. I don't need to be the most successful person ever. I want to strike the balance between I'm working and doing something that's meaningful to me that allows me to make a living. And in the rest of my time, I'm actually like doing things that I truly care about that enrich me that don't have anything to do with making money. Like that's the dream. Do I need to be flying a private jet to Europe? No, I don't want to do that. Like I just want to be regulated and chill, and not overstimulated 100% of the time. Lazy adjacent behavior often shows up as avoidance disguised as productivity. So, for example, you need to, again, clear out your email inbox or make an appointment or do something like the one activity or the one task that's actually going to move the needle. But instead of doing that, you end up deep cleaning your whole apartment, reorganizing your closet, researching, planning, and booking a new vacation, doing everything you could possibly do besides the one thing you actually need to do. This is lazy adjacent behavior. You're not necessarily lazy, but you're not doing the thing that's actually going to improve your life or move the needle. True discipline requires honesty about what actually matters. So if you look at your goals and then you look at your days, they should match. This is something that requires, again, constant attention. It's something that I'm constantly looking at, particularly given that I have a business. If they don't, something is off. Either the goal isn't real or your actions aren't aligned. I definitely struggle with this. Like I said, it's something that I'm working on. I have so many goals and so many things I want to accomplish, both in my business, but also in my personal life. And a lot of times I get lost in the busy work that I don't end up actually giving myself the time to move the needle forward on new projects or new things that I want to do. And it is a big goal of mine this year to really start honing down my focus so I can start introducing improvements and new pillars to my business. And I know that this is going to be an iterative process. So an example of this is I have made it a big focus of mine to improve the podcast, but there are elements of that I wanted to change. I wanted to reshape the structure. I wanted to get a little bit more clear and defined on the topics. I wanted to redo my intro. I wanted to make them more valuable, if that makes sense. And so I'm iteratively making those changes, right? Like I updated my cover art. I updated my little intro. I'm working on refining my scripts and refining my planning and thinking about how to bucket my topics so that they're things you want to learn about, but also things I want to talk about, and they're valuable things that help people. Like that would just be an example of focusing on needle moving tasks instead of like the minutia of busy work. Something that highly disciplined people do is they also simplify aggressively. So they think about the few things that actually matter and do those things first, and everything else becomes secondary. The goal isn't to optimize everything at once. It's to focus on small progress, not perfection. Again, that's why I bring up the iteration with the podcast. Like small changes over time are much more meaningful than doing nothing, not making the changes because you are emotionally dysregulated and overstimulated and can't think for a long enough period of time to actually lay out what you need to do. Another key shift is separating effort from outcome. So you can't control results in the short term, but you can control your behaviors. And discipline really does live in behavior, showing up, practicing, executing, repeating. So when you focus on behaviors first instead of outcomes, that's systems instead of goals, productivity becomes less emotional and you stop asking, is this working yet? And then you start asking, did I do what I said I would do today? Big difference, okay? That shift alone removes the pressure in your life. Productivity that moves your life forward doesn't feel like a whole big thing. It actually feels pretty boring. It's less frantic, it's less reactive. It's not about squeezing more into your day. It's about removing the things that don't matter so your energy can go where it counts. I feel like this is such a transferable lesson to everything I talk about, spending values, your financials, everything. It's stop doing the shit that doesn't matter and start focusing all of your attention, all of your energy, all of your money on the things that are most important to you. When discipline is rooted in self-respect, productivity stops being about proving something or like showing people how much you do or how busy you are. And it starts being about building something, like building a life that you actually enjoy in your quiet moments instead of a life that looks really great and flashy from the outside that you hate. And that I feel like is when progress really starts to get moving. So I'm going to wrap this up and I want to end with this. And it's that the goal is not to become hyper productive or obsessed with diligent output. It's to become somebody that you trust. This is something that I've been really working on too in therapy with my OCD. Like a lot of OCD is rooted in reassurance. And in order to overcome that, you have to learn how to trust yourself and your actions and your thoughts instead of constantly seeking reassurance. So there's a layer of discipline involved in that. It really boils down to becoming and proving to yourself that you are someone who follows through, you respect your time, you honor your goals, and you don't abandon yourself and abandon what you need when things are uncomfortable. It's not about becoming harsh, but it's more about becoming reliable. So ultimately, I hope you are feeling inspired to not only become more disciplined, but just approach it in a different way. Again, it shouldn't really be about rigidity. It really boils down to respecting yourself and keeping the promises to yourself that you said you're going to do. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, I would love to hear from you. Make sure you subscribe to my Substack if you want more. And I will catch you in the next one. Thanks so much for listening.